Okay, there we go. So there are a couple of student presentations which accompany today's class. So in keeping with my general commitment, I'm going to keep this one short. I'm really not that it's my urge to bury you guys in material. It certainly is not. Although I definitely can get more enthusiastic about talking about things than I sometimes anticipate. But I'm really, really cognizant of the workload that people are dealing with. And I frankly don't think that it is a particularly good answer to just bury people in extra stuff. Now, I recognize that to some extent I have done that as a way of substituting for classroom interaction and whatever. So, mea culpa. But I'm aiming not to bury you. So you got 2 student presentations this week, so I'm shaving half an hour off on this side, but I did want to say a few things. Okay, one is I didn't include this in the first section, which is, some general announcement-y things. Okay, so first general announcement. Next week is reading week. I did say that, but what I didn't say was that means that I'm not going to post a lecture or hold office hours or hold discussion or any of that. I'm taking a week off. I encourage you, to whatever extent is possible, to do the same. And I mean, I'm not fully taking a week off because I'm going to have a directorship board meeting for a not-for-profit, and I've got an interview on a Discord server, and I have something else that's sort of unexpected. But as near as possible, I've tried to clear my schedule. I would suggest that you do the same. If you can't clear your schedule fully, just try to get 3 days. 3 days. It can sometimes be enough to catch your breath. Now, I understand that the pressures otherwise are piling up. I will reiterate, okay, on my side, that I don't want to contribute to that. I do not want to be part of a stress load for you guys unnecessarily. It doesn't mean that I can fully waive all deadlines and all homework forever, alas, but it does mean and I think you guys have taken this to heart, but if you need an extension, ask for an extension. I'm pretty lenient around that respect. Just reach out to me, okay? And that also, I know I give the general impression that it's like I need to hear from you in advance. I understand that sometimes it's like the reason I didn't write this. I mean, look, full disclosure. Once in undergrad, I came to my English TA and I was like, yeah, I haven't written my paper. And she was like, well, why not? And I said, because I went on a 4-day bender. And she kind of... I don't think she expected me to be quite that honest. And I was like, look, I just had a breakup. You guys must think I've had all terrible breakups. For the record, I have had a number of good breakups. That's not what I meant to say. For the record, I have had lots of good relationships. You can believe me. You can trust me. I'm a professional. Yeah, but that one was not good. So I did drinking, also not the response that I recommend. So insofar as I'm speaking here as some kind of authoritative something or other, I don't recommend that's your response, but that's what I did that time. And so she was cool about it, is my point. She was like, oh, okay, try to get it to me when you can. Good, this is a human response. Sometimes it's going to be the case that you will not do things and then you will have this response. I know, because it happens every year. You will start to get the weird avoidant shame response thing, which is like, you won't want to reach out to me because it will have already passed and you will have some building sense. I cannot say it any more clearly than this. I don't care that much about it. It's not that I don't want you to do your work, but like, I'm not bent out of shape about it. I'm not experiencing chiding. I'm not interested in scolding you. I don't care about that. Your life is your life. So if you have things going on, okay, or you just like feel like crap, you can't get out of bed, or there's maybe things happening in the world that have thrown you a little off balance, it's understandable. But here's the thing. You actually have to reach out to me. Okay, so I have had 1 or 2 instances of people reaching out in the past on behalf of other people, and that's fine for bringing me up to speed, but for official reasons, I need to actually hear from you. So it can be just dead simple, but like I assure you, just reach out to me and we will come to some kind of conclusion. Okay, that wasn't what I even meant to talk about, but it's an important thing to talk about, so I don't regret it. Okay, reading week. That's next week. That means that you should do other reading. And non-reading. I'm halfway through the Queen's Gambit on Netflix. I'm probably going to finish that next week. It's good. All right, but there won't be a lecture. Obviously, I'm not posting up lecture. Neither are you. I'm not going to show up for office hours, so don't come to my Zoom. I won't be there. And obviously, I'm not doing the Thursday evening discussion either. So take the week off. Okay, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Good. So that's thing one. Thing two. Okay, good. I hope that you will extend the same degree of sympathy towards me as I have extended towards you, because mea culpa, I am behind. I don't think that's difficult for you guys to detect. I'm behind. I have a lot of project lines on the go right now, and it seems like many of them are, for whatever reason, hitting like a series of urgency things. So I've had a lot of things to deal with, and I've had a lot of stress among my clients. And the latter thing really does require my attention, as important as I think it is for me to meet my duties as an instructor and make sure that everybody is getting timely feedback. And I do appreciate that it can be stressful for people not to get that. If it comes down to a choice between that and tending to, somebody's quite immediate suffering, if I can intervene there, it's not a decision. Sorry, don't tell the university. But the flip of that is, like, I am aware of it. So part of what I have planned for next week, and part of what I have planned for this weekend and stuff, is to get kind of caught up on marking and feedback and etc. So I'm apologizing. I do feel bad. I understand people are like waiting around, to see, and that's stressful and everything. So I'm making the commitment to get stuff back to you. And I'm not going to give you a fixed time, because I feel like that'll come around and make me feel bad if I don't hit it. So I'm not going to do that. But the answer is soon. Like, it is a priority, and I've placed time on it. So full disclosure, sorry. But by the same token, I hope that you will extend me the kind of lenience that I make a point of extending to you. Okay. So that's that. I'll get stuff back to you soon. Next. What was the next thing? Oh, I just want to reiterate. It's really, really important, okay, that you go to the quizzes section of Quirkus and you offer your feedback, which will be anonymous, to the presenters. That is the most important form of participation that you can get, because you're giving somebody direct feedback on their work. It's very important. I know that it probably seems less important and less interesting in some way. And obviously your participation on the boards is likewise on the discussion threads and stuff. That's important too. They're both important. Okay. But get in there, do those quizzes. So if you've been doing the quizzes, like the feedback quizzes, good. Thank you. If you haven't, go do them. Okay. And it's possible, if you haven't in a bit, you may need to review people's presentations. If you haven't been watching people's presentations, please do. It's a courtesy that you're extending towards your classmates, and it's also part of the course thread. My assumption is that you are watching those presentations. They aren't a tack-on thing. They're a core part of the instruction. So I often specifically don't cover things because I know that they are going to be covered by somebody else. But that doesn't mean that I am not going to be sort of using them and have a certain degree of expectation that you're going to have some facility with those ideas. Okay, so it's important that you watch the peer presentations. It's important that you interact with those questions. It's important that you offer the feedback. Okay, if you haven't done it in a bit, treat it like you would a task of homework or marking, and just like blitz it, right? Like, do a few, but a few and then do a few. Often it might be helpful to do that immediately before you say do some other Jungian work. So, okay, thank you. Okay, damn, I used 8 minutes for that. 8 minutes for update. Okay, well, anyway, let's get to this other thing. So I'm keeping it relatively brief. But the thing I want to talk about is a bit of an extension and a bounce off from the material that we were discussing around the hero's journey, but also lots of references that I've made to sort of the Jungian developmental cycle, okay, and what that sort of means. Now, obviously, I've dropped references to this in a bunch of places through the lectures, right? So there's this classic idea that you sort of can't train as an analyst originally before you were 35. Around here, I think it's 30. I believe the Ontario program, you can't even apply until you're 30. I don't know how soft or hard they are on that, but they used to be pretty strict about it, on the basis that no matter how clever you are, no matter how wise, no matter how compassionate, if you're below a certain age, you simply cannot have acquired a sufficient amount of life experience, full stop. Right? That's the idea. Now, I'm curious to see how that interacts with people. And it's an interesting question. Certainly when I was under 30, I found that idea extremely annoying, right? And I would, of course, have lots of things to say, like, well, just because you're older doesn't mean you have more life experience. That's true, right? There are people who lead exceptionally experientially dense lives in a certain way, right? But here's the thing. As I mentioned, the passage of time in and of itself is an existential factor. And in a way, strangely, it doesn't even matter. If you've had a very existentially dense first 15 years, right, with lots of different experiences and so on and so on and so on and so on, you still just don't have that same experience of time. The way that you process those things is different, right? Now, that difference might be ameliorated to some extent by the sort of density of experience, or the through flow, if you want to go with a hydraulic notion of experience. But nevertheless, there's an irreconcilable factor. Part of it is the generalization, okay, of the idea, as I've mentioned, that 35 is that pivot point in life, right? Halfway to 70, and remember, this is the early 20th century that Jung is writing, so 70 is probably a plausible note for, like, how long am I going to live? 70, right? So it's kind of pivot point. And we know that this is the case psychologically, right? That people hit a point in their life when the nature of their time horizon changes, okay? Instead of being predominantly focused into the future, right? And the idea that the past is kind of close, but that the future is wide open, right? Focused on the beginning. That reverses. They become increasingly focused on the past, right? And they become increasingly aware of the end. They are oriented towards the end, right? This is the turnover. And for people, different people are going to have a different degree of sort of experience with this, right? If you happen to be somebody who's had a significant experience in your life with tragedy and with death, then that stuff is going to be considerably more front and center for you, right? At some level. But by the same token, it doesn't necessarily make it the case that you are oriented in that direction. You are oriented towards your limitation and finality. In my own personal experience, you guys must be sick to death of my personal experience. Anyway, in my own personal experience, such as it is, I've mentioned I experienced a lot of death. When I was 19, my favorite aunt died. There probably should have been a medical malpractice case, but she was my favorite aunt. I got the call. I lived here in Toronto. I was at my first serious job, working for Immersion Studios. And yeah, I got the call first thing in the morning. It was my mom. She let me know. And I hung up the phone. And my reaction to it was just like ice cold, really, right? Like an angry cold, I guess, but just ice cold. And I wasn't mad at her, and I wasn't really mad at the medical system and whatever. But I thought to myself, that's it. I'm not dying. That was my reaction. Now, I'd had a lot of death. That's a very it's an interesting response to have. Okay. And it's not the case that, sort of immortalists are limited to being young people. And I'll 100% admit that I have maybe slightly more than a foot still inside the immortalist camp. I researched this science pretty extensively, and I tend to keep relatively up on sort of developments around chemistry and biology that look like they might be able to sidestep the question of aging. And this is an ongoing point of differentiation between myself and John Vervaeke, because he very frequently expresses a certain kind of existential world weariness and has no interest in living longer. And I find that idea almost incomprehensible in a way, right? My thought about it is like, well, there are still lots of things I would like to do. Lots more certainly than I have time to do reasonably. And I don't anticipate that problem is about to go away. To be quite frank, I acquire books faster than I read them. And that rate of acquisition over reading seems in fact to be climbing as time goes on. I take it as a given that if indeed I die, which does begin to seem quite likely in the long run, if indeed I die, I'm going to die with things in this library I've never read. And the library would be probably a heck of a lot bigger. Okay, so you know, when he and I differ on that point, he's expressing a weariness, and he's, you know, that much older than I am. He's got about 15 years on me. So he's that much older. And my way of thinking is like, sure, give me an extra 100 years, give me an extra 500. I don't take it for granted that straight up immortality is necessarily desirable. But life extension, yeah, please, more, please. Like, keep giving me more until I don't want more, right? So I still have that attitude a bit. But also, I tend to look towards things with a slightly more seasoned eye, I think, than I once did. It's less black and white. I don't want to die, but as I get older, and you know, I will occasionally express. You know, I said to somebody, I don't know, when I turned 40 or something, or maybe I don't know, whatever, 40. I was like, you know, well, you know, I'm squarely middle-aged now, and they said, no, you're not. And I said, yeah, I am. And they said, no, you're not. And I said, yeah, I am, unless I plan to live more than twice what I am now. And honestly, I put my odds, frankly, given my family history, et cetera, at clocking past 80, pretty low, right? It's not something I super expect. I'm past the halfway mark. And that's not even taking into account, okay, that stuff that I mentioned about subjective time, which is to say the first third, the second third, the third third, passing at variable speeds. You take that into account, you know, let's say I lived to 75. Well, the first third was 25. Yeah, it's true. That first 25, that lasted a really long time. And you know what? From 25 to now has been fast. At 50, coming up with a certain amount of speed. I'm not there yet. I don't identify with 50. My time identification is always lagging behind, right? But nor is it the case anymore that I'm mentally 25. Like, I don't feel 25. Well, that's not true. On some days, I still feel like a 12-year-old, quite a few actually. But, you know, so I have a strong identification, and some days I still feel like a more than slightly pissed off 16-year-old. And, you know, my identifications are variable. But nevertheless, it's not too often that I localize myself as a 25-year-old anymore. And it was for a long time after I was 25. You may experience something similar. Many people do. So the point is, it's like, right, there is a shift that's occurring where, gradually speaking, my orientation, and this is what happens, begins to focus towards the end. That change, okay, in the way that we experience time is quite central in some ways to this sort of existential thrust of the course of life. And, you know, again, as I pointed out, there's, you know, an introversion, extroversion, doing outward work, doing inward work thing that is, I think, overgeneralized within the gender heroic myth. But, you know, there's kind of something to it. You know, you can consider certain aspects to it. And, you know, those of you in the class who, you know, are women and have considered having children will probably have a somewhat front and center awareness of this. Okay, now it isn't the case, obviously, that, you know, men can have children in an open-ended fashion either. A, it becomes increasingly difficult to find somebody to have children with if you're older, right? And B, it's the case that it's not that there are no negative effects to having children as you get older. The fact is, you know, your swimmers can get kind of wonky, and it seems like that's been linked to certain elevated, right, risk of certain kinds of things, right? So there are, you know, there are certain kinds of issues that can occur if you have kids when you're older. But generally, we socially think of it as like, whatever, men can take their time. Okay, and there is something to that. Men can somewhat take their time if they want to have kids. They can come to it later if they want. Women do not have that same level of luxury, right? Reproductive technologies notwithstanding. And of course, there's adoption and there's, right, there are all kinds of great options. And reproductive technology has gotten a lot better than it used to be. But I have a fair few friends who were women who, for all the plausible reasons, focused on their careers, initially speaking, right? And more power to them. They're smart, powerful, they did well, right, in their careers. Great. But then, you know, the rule, for instance, you know, friends I had who were lawyers, there's like a given rule. It's like, if you're a lawyer and a woman, you work your ass off at the firm until you make partner. And the second you make partner, that's job security. and you instantly try to get pregnant and take mat leave. That's a pattern that's so well recognized in the field that it's like almost a given. That's the rush is on, which is fine unless things don't line up that way. The thing is that not everything does defer. There's an urgency to career, right? I need to get my career on track. I need to, which people feel. But simultaneously, there's an urge on other things. And notice that both of those are outward. They're both ticking, right? It's not quite the same. I mean, obviously there is an urgency at some level towards doing inner work. But the fact is that, like, you know, we have the sense that it's always waiting. Now, who knows? Maybe if we all focused on inner work right off the bat, we would save ourselves a lot of trouble. I'm sometimes inclined towards that view. It's like, maybe if we foregrounded a bit more inner work in our lives and prioritized it and didn't treat it as like self-care, meaning you have to take time away from things, but rather treated it as the kind of responsibility that we would treat other sorts of personal development, right? If our culture prioritized it in that way. If it was like the case, it's like, well, you know, this is the 7th year, so you should take your sabbatical because that's what everybody does. You know, go off and think and be with yourself and sort things out and think about your life and then come back renewed. Maybe if we did that, we would have less hassle down the line. But that's not by and large what we do. We put our rush on so that we can get things organized in the immediacy of the moment. And then later, we start to get a deeper sense of the patterns that have been governing our lives. And you'll see that part of this is, and I think there's not much way around it. You know, there are lots of mental health conditions that typically speaking go down in intensity. There are some that go up, but that's relatively actually rare. Most of them tend to go down, especially when we're talking about emotional disorders. Depression tends to get often considerably less severe over time. Anxiety disorders, borderline personality, right, is often one that, you know, when you look at it symptomatically, the problematic aspects of it seem to drop over time. And that's not a universal statement. But the thing is, right, over time, you sort of learn who you are, how to interact with those things, how to moderate and modulate. One of the things that comes out of this that people are often surprised by, of course, is that older people report such high quality of life, actually, a lot of the time. We think that won't be the case. It surprises people, but actually there's a lot of satisfaction with older people. Late middle-aged people experience enormous dissatisfaction. There's a U-shaped thing that often occurs where happiness takes this wicked dip, right? And that's something that's undergone actually quite a bit of study lately, the so-called U-curve of sort of anhedonic. So people are like, I don't get it. I've succeeded in everything and I'm still miserable, right? But provided that one is past that, often late life is extremely happy. People feel more balanced. They feel more themselves. They are willing to, right, do things. That doesn't square necessarily with our idea of things. And the reason it doesn't square is, again, our culture hates old people. Or at the very least hates the notion of being elderly. What is it to be old? Can you get in contact with what it is for you to be old? What it will be like when you're old? It's hard, right? Why? Because old people are what? What does the culture say? Clueless, sexless, ugly, helpless, right? Miserable, lonely, etc., etc., etc. There's no prestige in being an old person. Not anymore, right? It all turned backwards when all of a sudden young people had to help older people program the VCR, and it's been on from there, right? There is that reversal. And so being old in our culture is a horrid, pitiable state. That's how we conceive it, even though it doesn't square off with the reality. The reality is actually older people experience considerably greater levels of satisfaction and happiness. Statistically, not everybody, but statistically. Oh, what else? Well, that's interesting, right? What else? They have a lot more sex than you think, which, you know, like, I don't want to be crass about it. And everybody's like, oh, cringy. But the thing is, right? It's like, well, and why not? Nobody wants to think about it. I don't even want to think about it in the way that I don't want to think about ever, my parents having sex. Okay. And I don't think that's a Freudian defense mechanism. I think it's just perfectly natural. I don't really need to know that. I'm aware of it. I can infer it. I'm here. I can infer it. And I look enough like each of my parents that it's a pretty square lock. I don't think I'm closely related to our male person. So, but I don't want to think about it. Likewise, okay, so we don't want to think about, there's lots of people I don't want to think about having sex. But the point is, right, they're having a lot of sex. And that doesn't square with our image of things in a lot of ways, right? So you can see like a little bit that this shift in orientation as you get older, right? That particular shift in orientation as you get older towards the end over the beginning is in our culture quite fraught. And this is the thing, there is a traditional pattern. The shift towards death is an idea that makes you contemplative, and you get used to certain things. You get used to yourself, you know yourself, but you also begin to experience the deep melancholy of the changing world. I talked about this a little bit last week when I talked about future shock, but the deep melancholy of the changing world. And what is that? It's like the world I knew is gone, and it's not coming back. And it would be strange for me to want it to come back, right? So what can I connect with, right? What can I connect with in myself and in the world that can in some way, shape, or form transcend that? This, incidentally, is one of the reflections that I've had relative to you should be paying less attention to history and more attention to eternity. It's like, right. It's like the mystical practice of connecting yourself with, sort of the inviolable ground of being or something. It's like once you do that, yeah, your personal survival, it's a little less stressful, right? You're instead anchored into something that's more and bigger than you, right? That exceeds you and surpasses and unfolds. It makes you a continuation of something, right? That it's not just that, it's not just that my, ancestors lead up to here, it's also my descendants, if indeed I have any. So, inner work, the developmental. Now, last thing, I've only got a few minutes left, so I'm going to kind of tag something because one of the students in the class was asking me about one of these developmental questions, right? And I sort of gave a pitch for a particular kind of thing. And I think it's, on reflection, I thought about it and I thought, I feel like this is a useful piece to think about. When we're talking about lifespan and we're talking about development, one of the things to remember, okay, and I think this is important because I think of it as being frankly central to individuation. It's this. Individuation, enlightenment, probably the different versions of enlightenment, in my pretty firm opinion, are different things. It is not the case that every person, as they seek their conscious development, because your unconscious development will get you to a certain point, and then you have to appropriate your own self-development. You have to figure out what kind of thing you want to become, what sort of being you're going to be. Who are you going to be? And that's the question, not what are you going to do? What are you going to do is secondary. It's who are you going to be? Who are you going to be in the world? And that question, answering that question for yourself is one of the tough ones. Not even one of the tough ones. It's the tough one in many ways, right? There isn't a simple, easy answer, okay? And, being on track versus off track, you can always tell when you're off track or off script because that's when things push back. But if you're on track or on script, it's remarkably quiet, right? Doesn't seem to provide a whole lot of guidance. What should I be doing? Okay, I'm going to do my own thing. Wham, right? Well, that's social constraint for you, okay? That's collective social constraint. But otherwise, the question is, really, what are you going to become? And the emphasis that I want to place here is this. It's not about all becoming the same thing. Like, there are 1,000 roads up the mountain is a thing I say a lot, right? Which is on the basis it's like, I just don't believe that any one human religion has the answer and the rest of them are in the dark. Like, I just don't believe it. I think they're all onto something. I should be clear about that. I don't think they're dumb either. I think they're all onto something. But I don't think any one of them has a monopoly on the answer. But the other thing is, yeah, they all lead up the mountain, and they lead up the mountain towards higher states of being. I believe that. But I actually think that there are 1,000 roads up the mountain, and it doesn't all come to one peak. If you attain a state of Christian grace, I don't think that's the same thing as attaining a state of satori. And in turn, I don't think that's the same thing necessarily as individuation. I think these are different states of elevated being, which is to say that we're an open-ended experiment, right? Ourselves, our developmental arc is an open-ended experiment, and that's part of what individuation is. You are integrating yourselves together, but there are so many potential ways that you could be. There will never be another one like you. And to the extent that you push that up, you really, right, by developing these deeper and higher functions, think about all the functions that you acquire that aren't inborn, right? The psychotechnologies, as it were, literacy, etc. That's something that you teach yourself to do. You acquire skills. People that drill in on skills really tightly. I'd recently watched Muse, the Kobe Bryant documentary, at a client's behest, and it was amazing. And it's the story of a man who turned himself into a basketball god and what the costs were. I highly recommend it. And the point is, he says, anybody can do this, but there's a cost. And it's true. Anybody can do it, and you can do all kinds of different things. They do not converge to a point, right? But that's not what it's about. It's not about finding the one true way. It's about finding a higher state for yourself, one that is more integrated and deeper, and one that is more functional, obviously, right? It's not even about happiness so much as it is about things like meaning, not being split against yourself. Maybe less happiness than avoiding needless suffering, which I suspect is very much what Freud meant when he said that the point of psychoanalysis was to convert neurotic unhappiness into regular unhappiness. You're not going to remove the element of tragedy in life, but you can remove the element of tragedy that's like, oh my God, this is so unnecessary, right? And it's bad enough when we see that in the world. It's like, oh my God, so much needless cruelty, needless, pointless cruelty, needless, pointless conflict, needless, pointless, right? About things that, honestly, you take a few steps back, you're like, is this really this? Is this what we're, okay. But you're not going to completely remove that. And that's okay. You can integrate that stuff too. So part of the project I want to get, and this is why individuation isn't making yourself literally indivisible, right? Because you're very divisible. It's a community of relationships. You're quite divisible, right? But in relationship, it's the dynamic whole. But moreover, it's like you're an individual because you're becoming more you, right? Individuation, it's becoming more you. And you recognizing the place within you, paradoxically, because it's, right, your consciousness finding a place within this like grand bazaar that is your psyche and all the forces inside of it. I'm doing a ton of dream interpretation in the last 2 weeks, like just a ton. For whatever reason, clients have been in the powerful upsurge. Maybe the election coming up, that kind of thing catalyzes. When Obama went in, I remember an analyst friend telling me that people's dreams lit up, right, with the symbolic resonance of the black man in the White House, right? And all of the sort of imagery that came off that. And there's a huge psychic split, obviously, occurring immediately south of us. The world's paying attention. So people's dreams have been very, very active, very charged. So I've been doing a ton of dream interpretation. And one of the things, of course, that emerges sort of again and again when you're doing that kind of work is the way in which dreams are so very often coaxing people forward, like, yeah, amazing, right? Keep coming, keep coming, keep coming. That there is something in them, right? The contrasexual soul image, if you want to roll it in orthodox, right? That there's something in them that's coaxing them further and further and further. You thought that was amazing? Come deeper. You thought that was amazing? Come down. You thought that was amazing? Leave behind that beaten path. See what's inside of yourself, right? See what you can become. See the things you can become. And it turns up again and again and again and again. It's fascinating how seldom people see it. But then gradually they do.